Hi everyone, and huge apologies for the technical issues that just occurred. I'm delighted to welcome Katie Humphrey, who's going to be giving a talk, Imposter Syndrome and Intersectionality. Welcome, Katie. It's an absolute pleasure having you here today.
Thank you for putting up with my lovely delays, and what a better way to start an imposter syndrome talk than having technical delays that are going to amplify my own imposter syndrome for being here today. So yeah, a little bit about me. So I'm Katie. I'm the founder of Curiously Divergent, and I'm here to talk to you about why you must use intersectionality when looking into imposter syndrome. And as I said at the beginning, I'm here also to tackle my own imposter syndrome by doing a talk on imposter syndrome. In true ADHD fashion, I have to teach in order to learn for myself. So by the end of the workshop, I want you to feel like intersectionality isn't as complicated as it might seem at the beginning for you, because it can come across as quite a complex topic. So hopefully by the end of it, you'll kind of grasp the foundations. So what is imposter syndrome? So if you ever sat in a meeting, I certainly have, where you think everyone is more experienced or is more competent than you are. But actually people were viewing you as a competent and a good person in the field or an area of your life. And you feel like you're going to be found out. And imposter syndrome has been documented in various marginalised groups, including the global majority and disabled people. And one thing that imposter syndrome doesn't do is discriminate. There was an article actually in 2011 written by the International Journal of Behaviour Science, where it states that 70% of people have imposter syndrome, regardless of their success. And actually the most recent thing that I found out, I was watching a Lewis Capaldi documentary, and he was talking about how he got more imposter syndrome the more successful he'd become throughout his career. So it affects everyone. So the main part of the talk is about intersectionality. So intersectionality is a term used to explain the multiple forms of inequality or disadvantage that overlap themselves to create further barriers. So intersectionality was first coined by Kimberly Crenshaw to refer to the double discrimination that was faced due to racism and sexism by Black women, and critiquing that the single lens framework, it just didn't address the anti-discrimination laws at the time, because women were having to choose between raising discrimination cases for racism or sexism, and they weren't able to use the combined lens in terms of how the sexism and racism was playing out. So these are the intersectional lenses. So we've got race, ethnicity, gender identity, class, language, religion, sexuality, mental health, age, education, and body size. And obviously there are many more than that. So if people with different social identities are treated differently within our structural systems, then like our education, criminal justice, healthcare, employment, housing, our reality is all going to be very, very different. Our lived experiences are very different because of that. So I can only really talk from my own personal experience. So I like to do things a little bit more interactive. So I'd like to think that you're at home and you're going to play along. So I want to play a game of put a finger down. So put a finger down. So you start off with 10 fingers, and as I read something, the aim of the activity is to kind of reflect on our own exclusions, discrimination, power and privilege. But it will be impossible for me to kind of name every single type of discrimination. So apologies in advance if I've left anything out, but I'm going to hopefully, we'll have time at the end for you to kind of maybe give comments and anything that you feel like I've missed that you want to talk about. So I'm going to read some statements out, and if it applies to you and you feel comfortable to, put a finger down. It's your choice whether or not you want to respond or kind of reveal anything to yourself. If you're in an office environment, the main thing is that you keep yourself safe. So put your finger down if you have a degree. Put a finger down if you feel safe leaving work late at night and going home alone after evening events. Put a finger down if people never touch your hair without your consent. Put a finger down if a day or week is going badly, you don't ask yourself if a negative situation has had a discriminative overtone. Put a finger down if you have never been denied a job opportunity or fired from one based on your gender, race, ethnicity, religion, age, body shape, size, or ability or sexual orientation. Put a finger down if you can talk about political or identity-orientated topics without fear of judgment or bias. Put a finger down if you are confident that if you were made redundant, you would be able to find another job without the financial strain. Put a finger down if you never have to decide which bills to pay or forgo meals because you can always afford food. Put a finger down if you're comfortable speaking out in meetings without worrying that someone will find faults in your logic or try to discredit what you're saying. And lastly, put a finger down if you do not depend on a sponsor, mentor, or another ally to be taken seriously or respected within your current world. So the aim of the game really was just really to help you understand what your own privilege. And for me, I wasn't able to access higher education. I went to university, I'd done 3 weeks and left because it just wasn't accessible for me. And at the time, I didn't know that I had ADHD. And looking back, I think that was one of the biggest factors to that. So in terms of my own kind of lived experience in neurodiversity, so studies on ADHD and stigma have concluded that the degree of rejection towards children, so we're looking at education, that they display ADHD symptoms were 2 to 3 times more likely to receive higher exclusion for displaying those symptoms. And around 25% of respondents did not want their child to make friends with a child with ADHD. And around 20% expressed clearly that they do not want to engage with a child presenting behaviour typically seen within an ADHD person. And around 50% of surveyed adults participated attached in seek behaviours, help for their for ADHD behaviour through medication or psychotherapy. And then if you look at the criminal justice system, neurodivergent behaviour may not seem recognised. It may be misinterpreted, making it more easily to be arrested. I know walking through the airport, my face and my behaviours completely changed because I just feel the guilt coming over me for absolutely no reason. The imposter syndrome is huge, which is why now I use the accessibility route, and that's just been a life-changing. And then court, you're more likely to be held on remand before trial. They may plead guilty inappropriately due to compliance behaviour and the way that the neurodivergent thinking patterns. Studies have shown that UK prisons populations are disproportionately made up of people who have neurological conditions such as brain injury, ADHD, autism, and learning disabilities. And studies have reported that people with neurological conditions are more likely to end up in prison or get trapped in a cycle of reoffending behaviour. And if we look at health, battling ADHD stigma in the global majority is nothing new, but evidence shows that Black and Latinos, people with ADHD, are particularly underdiagnosed despite showing higher rates of symptoms or the same symptoms of ADHD. Women are underdiagnosed for ADHD and autism, and ADHDs are twice as likely to die prematurely than those without ADHD because we're at greater risk of traumatic brain injuries due to accidental injuries, alcohol and drug misuse. We have poor self-reported physical health. More has increased by young adults, and there's been an increased risk of fibromyalgia to 30% of the females who have it also have ADHD. So my experiences as being a neurodivergent person is that I'm often taught by society that the way that I communicate, I move my body, express myself is wrong. That everyone struggles with that. And for me, I feel like this picture of me having a bit of fun with this lovely foot kind of on top of me and pretending to lift it really represents the society barriers that is kind of oppressing me being able to be my true, authentic myself until I really was able to start to pick this. And this is forever a learning journey for me. And I felt growing up that I was always an imposter. I felt like I was in like a masquerade ball all the time, and that I would have to kind of adapt to who I was and how I talk and what I do in order to kind of fit in. And I was always, growing up, I always was struggling with the question of who am I, because I never really understood, you know, the ADHD and my dyspraxia, and what that means being a neurodivergent person. I was always viewed as intelligent and able to kind of get results, but no one was able to kind of see the hard work that I'd have to do to overcome that process. Writing emails, I would be Googling responses, you know, making sure that the tone was correct, overanalyzing, the perfectionism would come out within that. Drafting, editing, I'd pull all-nighters, forget to eat, go to the toilet, and I just won't leave my desk, because I was always trying to ensure that, you know, there was no room to be found out, to be different. And then my brain goes often from like one thought to another, which means I may forget to celebrate my successes. So for me, it's really important to have feedback. You know, they say no news is good news, but for me, that's the worst thing, because that actually induces more anxiety. You know, having constant and regular feedback, whether that's constructive or positive, is really important, because for me, constructive feedback, I thrive on that because it enables me then to grow. You know, and being around years of hearing what I can't do, that I need to focus more, that I talk too much, I need to try harder with my handwriting. Turns out, you know, I have dysgraphia, and that's why. It's a neurological condition that actually affects the way that I write, and that I just need to apply myself. And this is where many neurodivergent people feel that they aren't good enough, and they're struggling to accept compliments. And being compared to neurotypical standards when you're looking at, you know, the workplace, performance reviews. You know, the times where I would get above and beyond was because I was going and putting in all these extra hours in order to kind of keep up. And the things that I did struggle with, you know, in supervisions, and they wasn't tailored to how my own internal strengths. And often I disqualify myself before I get started because of the rejection sensitivity dysphoria that I feel is that imposter. It telling me that, you know, you don't know enough in order to talk about intersectionality, you know, and those beliefs that I've had to work through and break down, and it's taken time. So if we're looking at imposter syndrome and the theory of imposter syndrome, there's several things that kind of stood out for me. So we've got the natural genius, and setting exceedingly high goals, feeling crushed when they don't meet them. You know, if we're talking about in my day-to-day life, like going to the gym, yeah, I'm going to go to the gym, I'm going to exercise every day. I also have binge eating disorder, so I'd set really high goals that, right, I'm going to have a day with no binges, and that's really unrealistic. And then what happens is I don't reach those expectations, and then that further strengthens the imposter syndrome that I'm facing. The superhero. This is the trap that I've fallen into many times. Overworking myself to make up for how inadequate I felt. And it's funny enough, even in this presentation, you know, I have an idea of imposter syndrome, I have an idea around intersectionality, but I've had enough notes to write a book. And if it weren't for my ADHD coach kind of pointing out that, you know, I don't need to have all these statistics, I don't need to have all this research, I just need to talk about my own lived experiences, and that's enough. That I then just redone the whole presentation, and here we are today. The soloist prefers to work alone. I find myself getting into that situation when I'm feeling overwhelmed, when I'm feeling burnt out. I've had enough like communicating, and it's feeling really tiring. And that if I'm feeling like my team or you know, my friends and family don't quite understand what I'm trying to communicate and my needs, then I would often kind of go off and just be that individual solo person, just to persevere and do what I need to do. And then the expert that led once again into this presentation. I felt like I needed to know absolutely everything, starting up my business. But what I found is actually, for me, the expert is my experience and what that means. And people can take and leave what they want from that. And that's the most important thing. And the most fruitful conversations I've had is when I've been talking about my own experiences. And then the perfectionism. So we've got never completely happy with their work, fixated on flaws instead of strengths. And I talked about constructive criticism. And one of the things also that come out for me was when my managers used to turn around to me and say, "You're doing perfect, there's nothing wrong, you're absolutely fine." And the first thought was, well, no one's perfect. How can I be perfect? Rather than just accepting the fact that what I'm doing is good enough for them right now. And they haven't got any areas at this moment that they feel I need to develop, but it doesn't mean there isn't going to be things that are going to crop up in the future. And celebrating those wins, right? So I also wanted to talk a little bit more about the superhero analogy that comes out a lot with in the neurodivergent community. So the superhero effect. I don't feel like, from my experience, that having ADHD is actually a superpower. I have strengths, just like everyone else has strengths, and I have challenges. But the difference is, as Professor Amanda Kilby, I think she created, was talking about the spiky profile. And if you haven't, I would definitely recommend going look into it. Is that my strengths are exceptional, but my challenges can be really, really, really challenging because of the barriers that are in society. And that fed in further to my imposter syndrome. I have ADHD. You must have boundless amounts of energy. I bet you get loads of stuff done. Oh yeah, I can get stuff done, but it either has to be now or never, or I have to cram it all in at the moment until last minute. So there's some sort of crisis. I remember turning up to an interview. I promised this, because there was an accident on the M25 actually that unfortunately someone passed away, and I was about 3 hours late, and I turned up and they just couldn't believe how cool and collective I was under pressure, but it was out of my control. But actually at the time, obviously I didn't realise I had ADHD as well, but it was a crisis. I know my brain works good in a crisis, so it will set up, cramming things at the last minute, getting my homework in at the last minute and projects and stuff because of the procrastination. But the procrastination doesn't always mean is my creative brain thinking of the ideas. It's thinking about where I need to go. And sometimes I can see like 9 different paths for one particular project. And that can then cause the procrastination to kick in stronger, and the imposter syndrome once again. And then we've got hyperfocus. So being able to zone into a particular thing and get as much information as I can, which is where the expert plays out. I've done entire project proposals in the space of about 3 hours, but that leads to burnout, and it can be debilitating because I can't always pick and choose when I want to hyperfocus on something, and then that hyperfocus leads to me not eating, going to the toilet, as I said earlier, and not sleeping sometimes because I just can't stop the thoughts of what it is that I'm doing in those particular projects from just going round and round and round. So for me, it isn't a superpower when you struggle to use these differences to initiate tasks. Pre-diagnosis led me to developing a binge eating disorder, anxiety, depression. I lost my bank card 9 times in a year. And I know people who've lost their bank card to the point that the bank thought, something was really wrong and they was going to have to start, not supplying them with a bank card. Thank God I have now contactless because I lose it a lot less now. Hyperfixations, rapidly ending and not being able to sometimes maintain hobbies and interests just because the dopamine kind of has worn off, that novelty, the reward. So undiagnosed ADHD can actually lead to depression, anxiety, difficulty into relationships, and higher mortality rates. And I think these are things that often get missed. So my top tips is kind of acknowledge your own privileges and fight the daily systemic oppression. So I have been discriminated against, and I noticed the difference before diagnosis to when I started to disclose, particularly in workplaces. and within communities where I would talk about, you know, oh, I have ADHD, and I said, oh, well, isn't everyone a little bit of ADHD? And that's kind of one of the biggest stigmas, because no, not everyone's a little bit ADHD, but because sometimes people might arrive late to things, or they might walk into the room and forget what it is that they were doing at that moment in time, or get a little bit distracted. But for me, it's debilitating, and it's quite contradicting, because I remember being at school where no one could really understand that having noise around me was more distracting, having people talking and conversations. But actually, when I was listening to music, that gave me a focus point, and that is how I managed to get through and get my qualifications. But then when that got taken away and banned from school, then my distractibility went up, and I then had to kind of stay after school of my own accord to kind of put in that extra work harder. And also, disabled people work 54 days on average a year for free due to the pay gap. And if you start looking at intersectionality on top of that and bringing in race and gender, you know, that pay gap is just will get bigger and bigger the more intersex that you place on top. And remember, imposter syndrome affects everyone differently because of different intersex that they will come across throughout their lives, you know, at different ages. You know, a person with ADHD as an adult will be very, very different to a child with ADHD. A woman going through menopause with ADHD is very, very different to myself, because the hormones and the imbalances and things will change and can make traits exacerbate. And when even though I didn't change as a person, the only difference was after I got my diagnosis that I had a narrative to be able to explain why it is, you know, I have these good strengths. You know, I've been told that I'm a really good verbal communicator, so, you know, it shouldn't be a problem going into meetings, but actually my working memory and recalling the information sometimes can be really, really difficult. Because in the ADHD brain, we have all the knowledge, but sometimes we can't use that knowledge to interact and initiate what it is that we want to initiate, or we can initiate it, but we can't get the knowledge that we have in order to then initiate it effectively to our full potential. And then by oversimplifying, we tend to leave out people within the conversation. So if we're looking at gender and we say that, I've heard it before where, you know, well, all women have imposter syndrome because, and that's why they don't ask for pay rises, because they just feel inadequate. But actually, if we generalise like that, then we're missing out trans men and women, non-binary, and, you know, disabled, disability, race within those. And once again, that is going to have different effects on because of those different experiences. And number 3, believe what we tell you, we're the experts. I'd probably be a millionaire if the times I could tell you where I have to over-explain myself or reiterate again what it is, or where I've said something in a meeting and someone's regurgitated it and made it out to be their idea, because the way that I communicate isn't always to the neurotypical as such communication style. You know, making eye contact, having those conversations, you know, that internal dialogue that I have, you know, are you staring too much? Are you giving eye contact? Don't cross your arms. So for me, crossing my arms actually is a comfort thing, because I don't actually like the top of my arms getting cold. But you're told that if someone's crossing their arms, they're really cross, they're not responsive. But actually, that doesn't mean anything to me. So I think the biggest thing for me is just don't make assumptions based on your own life experiences, and have that open dialogue conversation. And, you know, no one knows everything. I think for me, if someone just took the time to understand my disabilities and how imposter syndrome plays out within those, I would feel validated. And seen, and that kind of leads into, you know, included marginalised voices within your spaces. So, if you're developing policies, procedures, you're starting up new working groups, or you've got a branding or marketing campaign, it's about looking at those marginalised voices and getting them involved in order to, adequately meet the markets and make the workplace a safe environment that you're trying to, and the markets that you're kind of trying to target. And then if you're looking at the validation, so to me, if someone asks me how my disability shows up at work, or what they could do better to support me in order to help tackle neurodiversity in the workplace, that makes me, as I said, for validating. But at the same time, if I come back to you, which at the initial stages of when I got my diagnosis, and said, do you know what, I don't know, it's about working together. And as a manager myself, I would be going off and doing some research into it. Okay, so what is ADHD? Go and seek some expertise around neurodiversity in the particular kind of field that I'm in, and then come back and have a joint discussion with that person around that, and just treat them as human beings, because we all are. And then if you don't know, treat it as a growth opportunity. Don't get defensive, because no one knows everything. And don't avoid the topic, because that just makes the barriers a lot harder, and it's not going to help overcome the systemic oppression that marginalised people face if we don't talk about it. So if you've got any questions that you have, or you want to get in contact with me about kind of the things that I offer, because I offer one-to-one coaching and support around access to work for children, young people and adults, with kind of a one-stop shop, then here's my contact details for you. And I'll also pop it in the comments after. And then it's over to you. So has anyone got any questions, comments, or got any experiences that they want to come back with? Then, yeah.
Katie, thank you so much. That was a really enlightening talk, and certainly from my perspective. I invite anyone listening to pop any comments or questions in the chat, but I've got a question, if that's okay. I was really interested, from my perspective, Katie, to hear about the link between fibromyalgia and having ADHD. I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia last April. I'd been suffering with symptoms for a good couple of years or so. And when I did go and have this looked at further, they did all manner of tests and things, and nothing came up. And then, because I'd had a lifetime of trauma and abuse and so on, and been in fight or flight mode for pretty much all my life, my doctors concluded that the fibromyalgia was as a result of that. But I'm really interested in the link between that and having ADHD and being neurodivergent. So if there's anything else you can, sort of add to that, or any resources or anything, I'd be really interested.
Absolutely. So I'm more than happy to send out, or I can put the links to kind of the research and the articles that are about that I was looking into in terms of this health inequalities around neurodiversity. And that was one of the ones that discovered, and Professor Barkley covered that as well in one of his presentations. So yeah, I'll pop it out for you.
Thank you, Katie. I can't see that there's anything else come up, but thank you so much for giving this talk today and being with us on International Imposter Syndrome Awareness Day. Coming up, we have a session with Coach Denise Chester, and that's at 11 o'clock. But please all join in the conversation using hashtag #II2023 on LinkedIn and Twitter. And we've got lots more events coming up today, so keep an eye on our website. And we look forward to seeing you at our other events and continuing the conversation online. Katie, thank you so much again for being here today and taking part. and we'll be back again for our next event at 11 o'clock.